In December of 2020, 6 games were nominated for Game of the Year at the Game Awards. Those games were Animal Crossing New Horizons, Doom Eternal, Final Fantasy VII Remake, Hades, The Last of Us Part 2, and Ghost of Tsushima. All absolute juggernauts of games that could have easily won if released any other year. Naturally, the Game Awards of 2020 were some of the most highly contested and controversial game awards in recent history, and ultimately ended up with The Last of Us Part 2 winning. This choice did receive some backlash, especially with Ghost of Tsushima going on to win the Player's Voice Award, and so many players felt as though Ghost of Tsushima was denied its proper accolades by the critics. 5 years later, the sequel to Ghost of Tsushima was released, titled Ghost of Yōtei. Initial expectations were high, and many felt that Sucker Punch had returned with a vengeance to prove, beyond a shadow of a doubt, they had what it takes to win Game of the Year. But the nominees for Game of the Year 2025 were released, and Ghost of Yōtei is notably absent from that list. So what happened? Ghost of Yōtei is certainly an extremely well-made game. I think it does so much right, and it deserves a lot of praise, but I do believe there are a few crucial reasons it falls short of the coveted Game of the Year title. Before I get into what Ghost of Yōtei does wrong, or rather what it didn't do right, I want to talk about what I think Ghost of Yōtei did accomplish. Ghost of Yōtei is a masterpiece when it comes to its art direction. For games that take on this realistic visual style, it's hard to find something that does it better or even comparable to Ghost of Yōtei. The landscapes of Etso are vast and serene. Flowers bloom with impossible colors and the wind breathes life into it all. Another thing to note is that Ghost of Yōtei is not afraid of particles. No matter where you are, there are leaves majestically blowing in the wind, snow gently falling, or ash poignantly dropping from burning structures. It all adds a lot of drama to every scene and makes the visuals of the game feel extremely full in the best way possible. Even in combat, when slashing enemies, blood arcs through the air like red paint on a canvas. The game knows it looks great, and knows how to work that to its advantage. Important moments in the story are emphasized with widening camera angles showing off the grand landscapes and ethereal scenes, while riding your horse, letterboxing occurs giving you a more cinematic view of Etso, with its lush fields and idyllic forests. And maybe I just need to touch some more grass, but there were times when playing through this game that I genuinely felt the graphics of the game were more beautiful than what the real world could visually produce. But what I really appreciate about Ghost of Yōtei is that it has a distinct cinematic style, emphasized not just during the cutscenes, but during the gameplay and in the soundtrack as well. Both Ghost of Yōtei and Ghost of Tsushima are heavily inspired by the works of Japanese filmmaker Akira Kurosawa, known for films like Seven Samurai, Yojimbo, and Throne of Blood. His movies created the visual language of the samurai genre at the time: sweeping landscapes, powerful nature, and a balance of stillness with short explosive action sequences. He turned every frame into a painting. He focused on morally complex characters and used nature, silence, and atmosphere as storytelling tools. The influence of these films on both Ghost of Yōtei and Ghost of Tsushima is expressly clear, with both games even having a Kurosawa mode that makes the game's visuals resemble a Kurosawa film. But Kurosawa's influence extended much farther than just Japan. Italian filmmaker Sergio Leone was immensely inspired by Kurosawa's films, particularly the film Yojimbo, which Leone adapted into his own film titled Fistful of Dollars, starring Clint Eastwood.
I don't think it's nice you laughing.
Which went on to become one of the most popular films in both Italy and the United States at the time. Leone's films also popularized an emerging genre of movies known as spaghetti westerns. Spaghetti westerns were low-budget western films that depicted a stylized and dramatized version of the American West, characterized by tense standoffs, dramatic close-ups, and letterboxed landscape shots. Films like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and even a more modern film like Rango. With Ghost of Yōtei, the setting, plot, and cinematic language used all show how much inspiration they took from spaghetti western films. Every duel in the game includes a close-up of Atsu's face. When riding the horse through Etso, the screen becomes letterboxed, and the soundtrack is a blend of traditional Japanese and Western frontier music. Because Ghost of Yōtei tells a story about a lone wanderer navigating an untamed and hostile, yet beautiful frontier, the spaghetti western cinematic style actually fits its themes very naturally. With Ghost of Tsushima being so reminiscent of Kurosawa's work, it honestly makes perfect sense for Ghost of Yōtei to be more inspired by filmmakers like Leone, and it lends towards creating a game that captures that feeling of a Western samurai perfectly. Although video games have never been more beautiful to traverse, they are also easy to teleport through and skip straight past. What I mean is that fast travel has become extremely convenient, fast, and easy. Many games let you fast travel to any point nearly instantaneously, which is kind of a shame, not just for the art in the game, but also because the horse in this game is awesome. I think the horse in Ghost of Yōtei takes the award for one of video games' most powerful horses. This thing is fast, responsive, and can land almost any jump. It feels really good to control and will never die, which is nice if you're someone who becomes easily attached to your in-game animals. The horse is also able to charge into hordes of enemies, knocking them several feet back. My point is, the horse is awesome, and while I usually dislike riding horses in games, Ghost of Yōtei made a very cool one. Ghost of Yōtei, like a lot of these open world games, has a lot of side content. On the high end, we have the myth side quests, which feature legendary stories for Atsu to uncover. Each of these myths have a pretty compelling mystery, oftentimes supernatural, and usually have a cool reward at the end. My favorite was the Spider Lily General myth, which has you hunt down a samurai general across a haunted plateau. There are also side quests associated with each unlockable weapon, and have you train with a master and then go off on your own to learn and unlock the weapon's unique abilities. I particularly like the mission where you learn to use the dual katana, where you meet a one-armed master who teaches Atsu to strengthen her left arm. Part of the training involves you completing bamboo strikes using button combinations that are only on the left side of the controller. I thought that was a fun and creative way to connect the player to the experience of strengthening your left arm. There are also plenty of bounties to hunt down. The bounties are pretty fun for the most part and usually have some sort of twist to the story or gimmick to them that makes it interesting. Finally, there are also plenty of cosmetic collectibles, hot springs, charms, and shrines littered across the map, which can be fun to complete as they take you across all of Etzo and show the beauty of the game's environment. There are other normal side quests, which are mostly unremarkable and pretty standard fare when it comes to these types of open world games. Go here and kill this guy, take down this encampment, follow this person, you get the idea. Overall, I had a pretty good time with the side content and found most of it to be pretty interesting and worth playing. Ghost of Yōtei makes one seemingly significant change to gameplay. Now, instead of 4 different sword stances, Atsu has access to 5 different weapons. In terms of gameplay, it does offer a little more in terms of visual variety, but the core function remains the same. Different weapons, just like the different stances, are better suited towards facing different enemies. The katana is better against other katana users, the kusarigama against shields, the udachi against bigger enemies, the yari against the kusarigama, and the dual katanas are most effective against yaris. Narratively, this change makes a lot of sense, since Atsu isn't a trained samurai and instead has a fighting style based on adaptability and improvisation. I think this shift towards weapons instead of stances was probably the right choice in terms of how to make this game feel like a proper sequel, but I'm not certain it was implemented as seamlessly as it could have been. What I mean is that having different weapons serves a mostly cosmetic purpose, as the benefits you get from using the effective weapon against its specific enemy type aren't particularly noticeable. You could play through the entire game using one specific weapon and it wouldn't be much harder than if you always chose the correct weapon for each type of enemy. Also, switching between weapons mid-combat can feel very cool at times, but it does break some of the immersion when you realize she's pulling a 5-foot-long sword from thin air while her other weapons magically disappear. I understand video games do have to take some liberties when it comes to gameplay systems, and having every weapon always be visible would look ridiculous, but for a game leaning towards a relatively grounded approach to things, it does feel a bit out of place. The combat systems in both Ghost of Tsushima and Ghost of Yōtei are solid and satisfying to play, so this may be a case of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But while I feel the idea of using different weapons instead of stances was the best choice they could have made for a sequel, I do think that enacting that idea to actual impactful gameplay mechanics and systems didn't quite live up to expectations. Another thing I found particularly disappointing was the lack of utilization of Atsu's Shamisen. In the promotional material, it seemed like the traditional instrument would play a larger role in the game's overall design and direction. In Ghost of Yōtei, there are short sections in the game where you can play the shamisen by sliding across the trackpad of your game controller. It is interesting, at least in terms of utilizing the haptic feedback of the PS5 controller, but beyond that, it isn't noteworthy at all. I would have liked to see something similar to how the guitar worked in The Last of Us Part 2, where you actually could choose individual notes to play. You are able to play predetermined songs on the shamisen by sliding left on the controller's trackpad, and by playing different songs, you have access to a few different abilities. For example, the Song of the Wolf will summon your wolf companion to your side, and the Song of Shrines causes the wind to blow in the direction of shrines. I do like this idea, but I wish it was a little more fleshed out. Perhaps by playing certain songs you could administer a buff to yourself, or a debuff to enemies by intimidating them. It would allow the shamisen to be used in a more wide variety of scenarios, and make for some really cool moments where Atsuo was transitioning from playing music to killing her enemies. The game allows you to switch between different weapons during combat, so maybe the shamisen could have even been a weapon itself. I just can't help but feel there was some missed potential in the implementation of Atsu's shamisen, and especially because it was such a big part of the promotional material as well as Atsu's character design. Spoiler warning for the story of Ghost of Yōtei. When thinking about the narrative of Ghost of Yōtei, I'm left feeling overall unimpressed. On one hand, it is well done and Atsu is a well-developed character with understandable motivations and relatable traits. But this story of vengeance is extremely played out at this point, especially in the video game industry and even more so among PS5 exclusives. If you aren't familiar, Ghost of Yōtei follows a woman named Atsu. As a child, her parents and twin brother are killed by a gang, the Yōtei 6. Atsu is left for dead, impaled against a burning ginkgo tree. She survives, motivated by anger, hatred, and vengeance. As she grows older, she makes it her mission to avenge her family and kill the Yōtei 6. However, during her quest for revenge, she discovers her brother lived and has even had a daughter.
Thank you. I know this is all sudden, but we'll talk later, I promise.
As she reconnects with her brother and her niece, Atsu learns to let go of her quest for revenge as she has found another, more meaningful reason for life. Stop me if you've heard this one before, because I certainly have. I've seen the story of a main character who is initially motivated by revenge, but later comes to find out that they themselves are endlessly perpetuating cycles of violence before. But just because a story is predictable doesn't necessarily mean it's bad or not worth telling. What is more important is how a story is told. But with such a predictable story comes the expectation of telling it in a very compelling way that keeps you wanting to see how everything will play out. And with Ghost of Yōtei, I just don't think it tells its story in a compelling or interesting enough way to justify using such a played out entire narrative trope. One thing I do think Ghost of Yōtei does narratively well is the revelation that Atsu's twin brother Jubei lived as well. The moment where he reveals his identity is significant and is presented in a way that shows the complexities of such a revelation.
He was my father's.
Atsu. It's me. You don't recognize your own brother.
The moment isn't necessarily just happy, but has a sort of bittersweetness to it. Atsu deals with the aftermath of that in a realistic way. She feels happy, yet apprehensive, which makes sense. Knowing her brother is alive changes so much for her. Yes, her parents are still dead, but her brother isn't anymore. This undermines a lot of what's been motivating her for years at this point. Additionally, knowing Jubei was alive this entire time offers another unique form of suffering. Because of the Yōtei 6 attack on her family all those years ago, her twin brother and her were separated, and denied the opportunity to know each other and take comfort in their connection after such a traumatic event. Jubei also offers an interesting parallel to Atsu's character, showing a sort of what could have been. When Jubei was killed by the Yōtei 6, he was found and nursed back to health by the Matsume clan, and given a new family and home. Atsu had no such luck, and presumably had to survive mostly on her own. Jubei becomes a samurai and a good man, looked up to by the people. Atsu becomes a mercenary in the Onryo, a mythological figure striking fear into the hearts of many. I also like the reveal of Jubei having a daughter, showing that despite his traumatic past, he was able to move on and start a family of his own. This is all symbolized by their family ginkgo tree, which, although burned that fateful night, has continued to grow leaves all these years later in spite of the damage. When Jubei is eventually captured due to Atsu's relentless pursuit of the Yōtei 6, Atsu comes to the realization that she must let go of her revenge in order to protect the family she has left. In the final fight against Lord Saito, Jubei is killed, and Atsu decides to lay down her sword and be there for Jubei's daughter Kiko so that she can have a family and hopefully turn out more like Jubei and less like the Onryo.
You'll never be alone.
This all wraps the story up in a pretty satisfying way. My least favorite part of the story, however, was how it dealt with Oyuki. Oyuki is a woman who helps Atsu take down the Kitsune, a member of the Yōtei 6. However, it's revealed that Oyuki herself was originally the Kitsune, but rebelled against Lord Saito the night of Atsu's family's murder, allowing Atsu to escape, losing her title as the Kitsune. Oyuki tells Atsu she feels remorseful for her part in her family's murder, and now wants to right her wrongs by helping Atsu take down the current Kitsune, as well as the rest of the Yōtei 6. Although Atsu initially does try to take Oyuki's life, she does end up forgiving her and even calling her a friend.
But the innkeeper's daughter... I might forgive her.
Thank you.
I find this narrative decision honestly confusing and out of character. Atsu essentially fast-forwards her character arc when she forgives Oyuki. She was very instrumental in the murder of her family that night, and for Atsu to forgive her at this point in the narrative, before she learns the importance of setting aside her quest for revenge, is honestly just odd. It entirely undermines the significance of Atsu letting go of revenge later in the story, since she essentially learns that lesson when she forgives and even becomes close friends with Oyuki. The story of Ghost of Yōtei isn't bad, it's mostly good. It follows an albeit overused narrative plot and executes on that okay enough. There are some inconsistencies with the writing of Atsu, but those are balanced out with strong symbolism and interesting character moments. Overall, I find the story to be good, but lacking the ambition to tell a story that goes beyond familiar narrative tropes. Ghost of Yōtei is a great game and a decent sequel. Is it better than Ghost of Tsushima? In some ways yes, and in some ways not really. Ghost of Yōtei doesn't make any critical mistakes, and really has mostly minor areas where it could be improved. I do think Ghost of Yōtei improved in terms of the art direction when compared to Ghost of Tsushima, and in my opinion, the core of combat is also just as good, if not slightly more polished than its predecessor. But 5 years is a long time, and despite being a solid and fun game, there just isn't enough in my opinion to elevate this game to Game of the Year status. So what makes Game of the Year? Is it just an arbitrary decision made by out-of-touch critics? Or is it an accurate appraisal of a truly special video game? When I look at nearly all the previous Game of the Year winners, I find they have one thing in common. They had ambition, a daring to do something truly new. Ghost of Yōtei was a great gaming experience, but it wasn't a new one. Not really. It showed me a lot of what I've seen before, albeit done very well, but much too familiar. And that makes me wonder, 10 years from now, will we talk about Ghost of Yōtei or Ghost of Tsushima? Ghost of Yōtei is worthy of its predecessor, but like many sequels, it failed to light a spark of its own. Ghost of Tsushima lit that forge, and Ghost of Yōtei kept that fire going, but didn't create anything of its own, remaining a ghost of the game that was so close to winning Game of the Year.